the last word on Today FM.
Now, a big story of the week, burning issue for many Catholics, is the Vatican's announcement that if Catholics want to be cremated, they can't have their ashes scattered or kept at home, but they must be stored in a sacred place. David Quinn writing about this in the Irish Independent today from their own institute. You regard this as very important, and you're not impressed by some backlash that there has been by some people who seem outraged at this idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not massively important, but I mean, there is a kind of context for it, and the thing isn't as ridiculous as people think. I mean, basically, how we bury our dead and how we dispose of our dead and treat our dead, it says an awful lot about what we believe about life and death and the afterlife, if any. And that's why there's been so many burial customs in so many cultures and so many places all down the ages. So if you take the Hindus, for example, they cremate their dead, always have. And then the cremated remains get poured into the likes of the Ganges or some other river considered to be sacred. Now, if you had a lot of Hindus suddenly saying, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to keep the urn on my mantelpiece, don't be surprised if Hindu leaders come along and say, well, actually, you're supposed to do this, and just remind people. So there's something similar going on here. I mean, Christians have always been buried in consecrated ground in a communal place, and are simply reminding people of that fact.
Okay, but what's the reason for the communal places? It's a health and safety issue as much as anything else, is it?
Well, I think it's just that, I mean, again, if you look at the burial customs of all these various cultures, they've always taken a kind of communal attitude to how the dead should be buried and venerated and respected, because the dead is for the community, not just the family and not just for the individual themselves. Now, we live now, as I was saying in my piece today in the Indo, in a highly individualistic age where people kind of want to do their own thing. That's fine. But, that Christianity is a set of communal beliefs. You belong to a community of belief. And we have always, as I say, buried our dead in communal places.
Okay, John Hamill is a member of Atheist Ireland. He's Secretary of Atheist Alliance International. John, what do you make of this row this week?
Well, the first thing I thought, Matt, when I saw the instruction from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, is that this is real progress. So this is the body within the church that used to be known as the Inquisition, and their statement reads, "The church continues to prefer the practice of burying the bodies of the deceased." And it's not that long ago that the Inquisition preferred the practice of burying the living. So, for example, burying heretics alive or burying nuns alive who had broken their vow of chastity. So I think the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith should be congratulated on some real progress that they've made with regard to burials. In general, though, it just seems strange to me that the Vatican would decide to chastise the bereaved on this point. Their instruction says that Christ will raise us up on the last day, and after they go on to describe how Jesus is going to put all of the bodies back together again at some future date, they say that they cannot permit attitudes that consider death as a moment of fusion with nature or with the universe. And I think, unfortunately, for the person who wrote that, that person's body is already a fusion with nature and with the universe. That person's body is made of carbon and hydrogen and a few other elements, and all of those atoms came from other living things. And many of the atoms in our bodies today were also in the bodies of lots of other humans who lived millennia ago. So, look, if people want to think about how Jesus is going to put all the bodies back together again and how Jesus is going to manage to do that when the same atoms were used to comprise so many different bodies, that's absolutely fine. But it just seems rather poor taste for the Vatican to admonish grieving people that they shouldn't be allowed to deal with their own grief in their own way.
Well, I mean, it's quite imaginative bringing up all the dark chapters of church history. I mean, I may as well go and bring up all the dark chapters of atheistic history if we're going to go down that route, but I won't. I'll stick to the topic at hand. I mean, there's been considerable mockery there of what Christians believe, and in fact, what all people of faith, whether they be Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, whatever, believe about how they should treat their dead. So this isn't simply a Christian thing in terms of how we communally treat our dead. So if an atheist wants to scatter their ashes to the four winds, I have absolutely no problem with that. But as an atheist, I mean, this doesn't concern you really. I mean, this is aimed at Catholic believers. And by the way, most Christian churches would have similar guidelines about how to treat the dead. Because again, it's a communal thing. Our dead are buried in a communal way and are remembered that way. And it's simply reminding people of that fact. That's all. I mean, it is really quite an innocent thing. I mean, any Catholic is absolutely at liberty to ignore the instruction. But, I mean, the Church is also at liberty to remind people this is how we do it. It is a communal thing. Just, again, as a Hindu leader would be completely at liberty to remind Hindus that actually that is not how you're supposed to dispose of the ashes. And that's all, really, that the thing is about.
And I suppose it is fair to say, John Hamill, this is only an instruction from the Vatican to Catholics. It's not like it's something that they want imposed upon non-Catholics.
Yes, well, of course, I think David's right that the Church is at liberty to make these comments. I don't think anyone suggested that the Church shouldn't be allowed to make these comments. I think it's a bit strange to describe what I said as mockery. What I said was that Jesus is going to put everyone's bodies back together again. That's just stating what Catholic theology is. I mean, I happen not to believe that, but it wasn't my idea. That was the Church's idea. That wasn't my idea. But a lot of the commentary that I've seen on this relates less to those aspects of it and more to the financial aspect. So I have to say that of all the funerals that I've been at, I've never seen a priest demand a large sum of money. Maybe somebody gives a priest 50 quid or something like that. But it does seem to be the case that if every Catholic in the world decided to have only secular cremations from tomorrow onwards, then the Church would be financially worse off as a result. And it's hard to know by how much exactly, because the Church doesn't publish accounts in the same way as, say, limited companies or pay taxes in the same way. But I think that this kind of instruction from the Vatican really seems to be part of a trend. So, for example, in August 2007, the Vatican launched the new airline with an initial service flying to Lourdes. And just 3 months after that, the Vatican announced that they would be offering indulgences from purgatory to any Catholic who attended Lourdes. Now, maybe that was just a total coincidence, but the Vatican's very quick to tell the world what Yahweh wants people to do and what Yahweh doesn't want people to do. And it seems it's very rarely the case that Yahweh wants people to do anything that is not in the financial interest of the Catholic Church. So the Church tells us that during the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Woe to the rich, for they have already had their comfort." But it seems the Church would also have us believe that Jesus wanted to make an exception to that rule for the Vatican. He wanted the Vatican to be the richest church in the history of the planet. And in fairness, they're making a pretty good job of that.
Okay, I'm not sure how that's necessarily relevant to this particular debate because
he's gone off on numerous tangents.
What the Church has said is they're instructing people that they must bring the remains to consecrated ground and manage funerals through the Church. That's why it's relevant.
Look, I mean, you can regard it as a money-making racket, if you wish, and take the most cynically corrosive possible view of it, if you wish. Okay, fine. I mean, if you want to believe that, that's 100% fine. But all down the ages, for the 2,000 years that Christianity has existed, before, there was much money for anybody to dispose of and much money to give to priests, when the world was much poorer than it is today, and much of the Catholic world and much of the Christian world and much of the world is still very poor. It has been the belief and practice of Christians to bury their dead in consecrated ground and in a communal way, and that is simply what the Vatican is reminding us about.
Okay, the Cardinal Muller said that cremation is not prohibited, and the line is, in memory of the death, burial and resurrection of the Lord, burial is the most appropriate way to express our faith and hope in bodily resurrection.
Well, I mean, that is the Christian belief. And I mean, again, you can mock this as much as you like, but again, how we bury our dead, again, tells us much about what we believe about life and death and the afterlife, and how an atheist buries their dead, however that may be, also says something. And I mean, again, all the beliefs that we have had about the dead and the afterlife can be mocked if we like, but an atheist could be equally wrong when he says when we're dead, and there's no afterlife. That could also be a widely untrue belief.
Okay, but David, there's no doubt knowing what's going to happen to you when you go. You'll be buried in Catholic consecrated ground.
Whether cremated or not, I'll certainly be buried in the ground.
Okay. What about you, John Hamill? When you go, how do you want to be disposed of?
So there's a number of mechanisms that secular people tend to use. I think I prefer the approach of being buried and having a tree planted on the grave. That seems like a symbolic thing to me. But I'm interested that David admonishes me for talking about the history of the Church and then justifies the Church's own practice from the Church's long history. And I think those two things are related. If you want to talk about about the history of burials and that tradition being a reason to continue that practice, then you can talk about lots of other histories.
Thank you very much, John Hamill from Atheist Ireland, David Quinn, columnist for the Irish Independent.